Picture this. The night is thick over Agra, the moon a pale coin hanging above the domes of the Mughal palace. The Yamuna River glimmers faintly below, reflecting the silent majesty of marble walls that seem carved from light itself. But deep, within those walls, past the courtyards where fountains once sang and peacocks once danced, another world stirs, hidden, forbidden, alive. You can almost hear it, a faint laugh, the rustle of silk, the whisper of a song that shouldn't exist. It seeps through corridors of shadow, where guards stand still as statues, and eyes look away from doors that should never open. You walk through the labyrinth of stone, your sandals echoing against the mosaic floor. The scent of rose and smoke wraps around you, sweet, intoxicating, dangerous. Ahead, a single lantern burns, its light trembling like a secret trying to survive. You reach a narrow archway, half covered by a velvet curtain embroidered with threads of gold. Behind it, a melody hums softly, so soft it almost sounds like breathing. You lift the curtain, and the world changes. Inside, the air is warm and heavy. 100 candles flicker against mirrored walls. The floor is covered with Persian rugs so thick your steps disappear into silence. Women move through the haze of incense, their faces half-veiled, their eyes alive with something that feels both powerful and tragic. They glide like ghosts of forgotten queens, their laughter echoing through the chamber like broken bells. A musician plucks the strings of a sitar in the corner, each note trembling with longing. This is no ordinary pleasure house. This is a world that history chose to forget. Hidden behind the grandeur of the Mughal Empire, behind the marble palaces and the prayers of emperors, lay secret brothels known only to the few who could afford sin wrapped in silk. They existed not in the bazaars or the outskirts of cities, but inside the very walls of the royal palaces themselves. Behind the same walls where emperors prayed, courtesans danced, behind the same marble screens where queens slept, shadows performed the empire's quietest rituals. Imagine being one of those women, born far from this palace, perhaps in a small village, where the night smelled of rain and not of fear. Imagine being brought here, trained, painted, dressed, and renamed. Every move, every glance rehearsed. Every word you speak could shape a prince's heart, or seal your fate. You are beauty, sculpted into obedience, a song sung in a language of survival. Men come to you seeking escape, but it is you who must carry the weight of their secrets. And the men, emperors, generals, poets, believed they ruled the empire. Yet in these rooms, under these flickering lights, they surrendered their crowns. A whisper here, a kiss there. Pleasure became power, and power became poison. What began as entertainment often ended as influence. Behind those curtains, alliances were formed, betrayals were born, and kingdoms trembled without a single blade drawn. The historians never wrote of this. They wrote of marble tombs, of battles and bloodlines, of love stories carved in stone. But stone cannot speak. The truth was written elsewhere, in silk sheets and perfumed air, in the tears of women whose names were never recorded, whose songs were never meant to survive. And yet, their story does. Because power, no matter how carefully hidden, always leaves a scent behind. So tonight, we walk through those corridors of silence. We will lift the veils history refused to touch. We will see the women behind the walls, the desires that built dynasties, and the sins that destroyed them. Stay with me, because what lies beyond this curtain will change everything you thought you knew about the Mughal Empire. This is not the tale of kings and conquests. This is the story of whispers in the dark. This is the secret heart of an empire that tried to look divine, but beat with human hunger. The night deepens, and the music grows softer, like a heartbeat slowing down after too much passion. Inside the secret chambers of the Mughal palace, the air is no longer still. A door opens quietly, and a figure enters, an imperial officer, his face hidden beneath the folds of his turban. He does not speak. He does not need to. The women already know what his arrival means. Somewhere in the shadows, a signal passes. The musician lowers his eyes. The candles are dimmed. The performance is about to begin. This hidden world was built on silence. Its very existence depended on it. Even the wind outside the marble screens seemed to carry oaths it could never repeat. Within the grand structure of the Mughal court, where laws were written in gold and decrees in blood, there existed another system, one that functioned entirely in whispers and glances. It was known only to the trusted few, eunuchs, chamberlains, high courtiers, and sometimes the emperor himself. The secret brothels of the palace were both paradise and prison, a place where pleasure was controlled like politics, and every smile carried the weight of obedience. They were not brothels in the crude sense that history imagines. They were institutions, meticulously crafted to serve the aesthetic and emotional appetites of men who ruled half the known world. Inside, nothing was ordinary. The women were not called prostitutes. They were artists, performers, and, in some cases, spies. Every gesture they made was part of a larger performance that could alter the fate of an empire. The walls themselves were designed for secrecy. Layer upon layer of corridors, mirrored ceilings, and carved lattices that distorted sight and sound. Behind one wall, a poet might be reciting verses to a courtesan. Behind another, a general might be confessing sins to a woman who could ruin him with a single word. In the early years of the Mughal dynasty, under emperors like Akbar, this world existed in subtle harmony with the court. Pleasure was not hidden. It was refined, intellectual, and controlled. Music, poetry, and dance were celebrated as divine arts, and those who mastered them held a respected, if delicate, place in society. But as generations passed and emperors grew more indulgent, these spaces began to mutate. What had once been temples of art became sanctuaries of indulgence. And in that shift, the darkness crept in. The harem itself was a city within a city, a baiti, labyrinth of chambers housing hundreds of women. Queens, concubines, servants, and entertainers. But beyond the harem's visible splendor, a smaller, more secret section existed. It was known in hushed tones as Mehfil-e-Khauf, the Assembly of Shadows. Only the emperor's most trusted companions could enter. Inside, the brothels functioned like clockwork. Dancers were summoned by coded gestures. Musicians played until dawn. Wine flowed from silver jars that never seemed to empty. But beneath the rhythm of music and laughter, there was something else. A system of control so intricate it rivaled the empire's own administration. The eunuchs were its silent sentinels. Stripped of worldly desire, they were considered incorruptible, perfect, guardians for a world built on temptation. They managed schedules, arranged performances, and ensured that no one left with knowledge that could endanger the court. Yet, even they were not immune to the corruption of proximity. Many became power brokers, trading favors between courtesans and courtiers, whispering secrets for gold. They were the invisible hands that moved the empire's most delicate machinery, and above them all sat the emperor, both god and captive. His desires shaped the rhythm of this world. His moods dictated its rules. On some nights, he would summon a single courtesan and speak to her as if she were his equal, asking her about poetry, music, or dreams. On others, he would watch from behind a screen as women performed dances that told stories of forbidden love, betrayal, and death. Each performance was a mirror held up to his soul, reminding him that even the most powerful man in the world could be enslaved by his own heart. But not all emperors were the same. Some embraced this secret world, others feared it. Jahangir, known for his passion and artistic soul, found solace in it. His obsession with beauty led him to blur the lines between love and control. Aurangzeb, on the other hand, condemned it. He called it sin, a distraction from God. And yet, ironically, it thrived under his rule, forced further underground, more secretive, more dangerous. Because desire does not vanish when forbidden, it multiplies in the dark. There were nights when the secret chambers echoed with laughter, music, and the clinking of anklets. And there were other nights when screams echoed instead, when jealousy turned deadly, when rival courtesans fought for favor, or when a drunken noble lost control of his power. Yet, by dawn, the blood would be washed away. The music would resume, and history would record nothing. The palace walls absorbed every secret, as if made to protect the very sins that sustained them. Beyond the brothel rooms, the rest of the palace slept. Ministers prepared decrees for mourning. Soldiers stood watch. The muezzin's call floated from distant minarets. The empire carried on, oblivious to the truth that its fate was being shaped not just in courts and councils, but in these hidden rooms by women whose names no one dared to write. The courtesans knew it. They understood their role in this silent theater. They were performers, yes, but also witnesses. And witnesses are dangerous. In that darkness, under the slow pulse of music and perfume, history took shape not in battles or treaties, but in whispers. A prince betrayed his brother because of a courtesan's promise. A general delayed a war because of her tears. A poet's forbidden poem found its way to the emperor's ear through her lips. Every secret in the empire passed through these chambers first, like incense through a flame. And yet, for all their power, these women remained unseen. No portrait bore their faces. No chronicle spoke their names. They existed in the margins, immortal, in silence. But what they built, what they endured, would ripple through centuries. For every empire has two histories, one written in gold and one written in shadow. And the shadows of the Mughal Empire still whisper, if you know where to listen. They called them tawaifs, the women of music and perfume, the ones who lived where light never fully reached. To the world outside, they were artists, entertainers, the living jewels of the empire. But inside these hidden chambers, their beauty was both their power and their curse. They were prisoners wrapped in silk, queens without crowns, and every smile they gave was a carefully calculated act of survival. Most of them came from faraway places, some captured during wars in Central Asia, some sold by families in debt, and others drawn to the empire's heart by promises of fortune that dissolved into chains. Their stories began differently, but all ended the same way. Behind the curtains of the Mughal harem, where names were replaced with titles and freedom was replaced with obedience. The training began the moment they arrived. Older courtesans, those whose beauty had faded but whose cunning had sharpened, taught them everything: the art of dance, the subtleties of speech, the mastery of seduction. Every movement, every look, every pause between breaths had meaning. They learned how to play the veena and the sitar, how to write love poetry in Persian, how to recite verses from memory until the words became a second skin. They were sculpted into perfection, polished until they could outshine the moonlight on marble. But behind that polish lay fear, the fear of being replaced, of being forgotten, of aging one day and watching their place taken by someone younger, more flawless, more cruelly desired. When they first performed before the emperor or his nobles, the room would fall silent. Their music was not just entertainment, it was a kind of hypnosis. Men who commanded armies, who signed death sentences without hesitation, would find themselves undone by a single glance. And yet, these women never forgot where they stood. They were not queens. They could be given jewels one night and cast aside the next. But they learned something their masters never understood: the secret that power, once tasted, never truly leaves your hands. There was one, they say, known only as Zora. She came from a family of musicians and rose quickly through the ranks of the imperial court. Her beauty was legend, her wit even more so. Men came to her not just for pleasure, but for counsel. She spoke softly, with the kind of intelligence that could disarm suspicion. In her chamber, she kept a map of the empire, hidden behind a silk tapestry. Those who visited her never noticed the tiny ink marks she made, each one representing a man who had confessed something under the spell of her eyes. Zora did not rule armies, but she ruled information, and in the Palace of Whispers, information was everything. Others followed her example. The Tawaifs became more than entertainers. They became spies, diplomats, and power brokers. They could make a man believe he was the one in control, while guiding his thoughts like a puppet on invisible strings. A single rumor, placed in the right ear, could bring down a minister or start a war. But for every victory they achieved, there was a price. Some were found out and quietly disposed of. Others simply disappeared, their chambers reassigned, their names erased from the ledgers as though they had never existed. There were also those who believed in love, a dangerous belief in a world where affection was currency. One girl, Meher, was said to have fallen in love with a young prince. They met in secret, exchanging poems and promises. But when the emperor discovered their affair, the prince was exiled, and Meher was locked away in a sealed chamber for 3 days. When the door was finally opened, she was gone. Some said she escaped into the night. Others whispered that she drowned herself in the Yamuna, her bangles still clinking beneath the current. Her story spread through the palace like a haunting refrain, and for years afterward, no one dared to speak her name aloud. Yet even in their pain, these women left marks upon the empire that time could not erase. Their poetry survived in fragments, hidden in anthologies, and passed down by disciples who refused to forget. In one verse, written by an anonymous courtesan, the words still sting centuries later. He thought my song was for him, but I sang to remember myself. That was their rebellion. Beneath the layers of duty and pretense, they clung to the one thing they could still control: their art. It was through performance that they kept their humanity alive, even as the world tried to reduce them to ornaments. But their influence did not end with music or beauty. They shaped language, fashion, and etiquette across the Mughal world. The way nobles spoke, the way poets wrote, the very rhythm of love in Indian art. much of it was born in those hidden rooms. The gestures of a dancer, the tilt of a courtesan's head, the poetic way she declined a man's advance, these became cultural codes, imitated by women of the court and admired by men who never realized their origins. Still, the truth was darker. For every courtesan who rose to influence, 100 others withered unseen. The empire's appetite for youth was insatiable. A woman past 30 was considered faded. Many were quietly dismissed, sent to smaller estates, or into forced marriages. Some opened private music schools. Others, too broken to continue, vanished into the slums that grew around the edges of Delhi and Lahore. The empire forgot them, but their songs did not die. The servants carried them, the apprentices remembered them, and the melodies drifted through time like ghosts looking for a listener. The irony was cruel. The very men who sought their company at night condemned them by day. Poets praised their beauty in verse while clerics denounced them in sermons. Even the emperors themselves walked that fine line, patrons of the arts by dawn, hypocrites by dusk. The women behind the curtains saw all of it. They heard the prayers. They saw the lust. They watched men who called themselves divine fall to their knees in hunger and shame. And so they learned to smile without feeling, to love without hope, to dance for gods who never looked down. Yet deep inside, they understood something the empire never did, that behind every act of power lies a need, and behind every need lies fear. They became masters of that fear, using it to survive, to control, to endure. Even today, if you stand in the ruins of the old Mughal palaces, when the night is still and the wind moves through the arches, you might hear it. The faint sound of anklets, the ghost of a song carried on the air. It is the sound of women who refused to be forgotten, whose beauty became their cage, and whose silence became their story. Power and desire were twins in the Mughal world, inseparable, dangerous, and often fatal. The courtesans knew this better than anyone. They watched from behind curtains as the empire's great men, emperors, princes, generals, bent beneath the weight of their own appetites. What began as art and entertainment had transformed into a theater of manipulation, where love was currency and pleasure, a weapon sharper than any sword. By the time Shah Jahan's empire reached its golden age, the boundaries between politics and passion had almost vanished. Alliances were sealed not only in council halls, but in bedrooms. Ministers sought favor not just through bribes, but through introductions to the right woman. Courtesans became intermediaries between ambition and desire, playing matchmaker one moment, spy the next. Behind the marble screens of the Red Fort, whispers could topple a vizier more swiftly than rebellion. One night, as legend tells, a powerful noble, Mirza Qasim, visited a courtesan known as Yasmin, famed for her beauty and her sharp tongue. He came seeking comfort, but she saw opportunity. Between cups of wine and laughter, she drew from him the truth of a brewing conspiracy, one that aimed to weaken the emperor's hold on the throne. The next morning, that plot lay in ruins. The conspirators vanished, and Yasmin's chamber was filled with jewels. Her power was now undeniable, yet so was her peril. For every secret she revealed, another grew around her. She lived, as all courtesans did, on the edge of a blade. In these brothels of luxury, everything was politics disguised as love. The emperors themselves were not immune. Shah Jahan's devotion to Mumtaz Mahal was legendary, but history forgets the years before her, a youth filled with temptations, where women of the harem competed like stars in a night sky. Some say that the emperor's obsession with building perfection, the Taj Mahal, the ultimate monument to love, was born from guilt, a longing to create something pure after years spent in sin-soaked chambers. Others whisper that, among those women, there was one whose memory haunted him, even as marble replaced flesh. But it was during the reign of his son, Aurangzeb, that this secret world turned upon itself. Aurangzeb, rigid and devout, sought to purify what he saw as the empire's decay. He banned music from the court, silenced the songs that once filled the night, and ordered the closure of performance houses. For the courtesans, it was the end of an era. Yet what he tried to destroy, he only drove deeper underground. The brothels went silent, but not empty. The empire's desire simply hid itself in darker corners. Aurangzeb may have prayed by day, but at night his ministers still whispered of gatherings held in secret. The same music, the same women, the same hunger for what he called forbidden. The hypocrisy was inescapable. The same hands that signed edicts against sin still reached. For perfume and silk, the courtesans learned to adapt, becoming more discreet, more dangerous. Pleasure became rebellion. To meet them, one had to pass through secret corridors, bribe eunuchs, and swear oaths that could cost one's life. Yet the risk only made the allure stronger. By now, the lines between politics, faith, and lust were so entangled that no one could tell them apart. The empire's fate began to hinge on desire itself. Courtiers bribed musicians to send coded messages through songs. Rival factions used courtesans as informants, feeding them details of troop movements, alliances, and betrayals. And some of these women, born with nothing, rose to become power brokers whose opinions carried weight equal to a general's sword. There was one woman, her real name lost to time, known in stories as Parizad, born of angels. She was said to have captured the heart of a high-ranking minister. Every night, as he visited her chambers, he spoke carelessly of state matters, believing her to be merely decoration. But Parizad listened, and what she heard became her weapon. She sold the information to the emperor's enemies, playing both sides until the truth inevitably caught up to her. One morning, her chamber was found empty. Some say she escaped into Persia, others that she was executed in silence. Either way, her story became a warning to those who followed. In the palace of pleasure, loyalty was a luxury no one could afford. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this hidden politics was not treason, it was obsession. When men of immense power became infatuated, reason evaporated. A prince once gifted an entire province to a courtesan after she refused him for 3 nights. Another, driven mad by jealousy, ordered the hands of his rivals cut off. The empire, for all its grandeur, was ruled as much by emotion as by law. And in those moments of madness, the courtesans saw the truth that emperors refused to face, that power without control was just another form of slavery. As the years passed, the brothels became archives of secrets. Every scandal, every betrayal recorded not on paper, but in memory and song. The eunuchs guarded these stories as currency, trading them for influence. The courtesans themselves carried them like invisible scars. They could never tell what they knew, but their silence was its own form of dominance. Men feared them as much as they desired them, because pleasure fades, but shame endures. And yet, beneath this web of intrigue, something deeper stirred, a quiet exhaustion. The empire itself was beginning to crack. The wealth that once funded art and architecture now fed endless wars. The glory that once defined Mughal rule had begun to decay from within. And as the empire weakened, so too did the walls that had kept its darkest secrets safe. The laughter that once filled these hidden halls now sounded forced, hollow, desperate. The women knew it. They could feel the change in the air, the fading of music, the chill of approaching silence. It was only a matter of time before the walls themselves would fall, and with them, the illusion of eternal power. The courtesans, who had once shaped empires from the shadows, would be the first to see the cracks form. Their survival had always depended on the strength of the men who ruled them, and when those men began to crumble, so too did the world they had built together. Still, for a moment, they lingered. Even as the empire's faith turned to fanaticism, even as its art dimmed beneath the weight of hypocrisy, the women continued to dance. They danced not for love nor for gold, but for remembrance. Every movement, every song became an act of defiance, a way to say, "We existed, we mattered, we will not be erased." And though centuries would pass, and the palaces would crumble into dust, the echoes of their laughter, their sorrow, their power would remain, woven into the air of India itself. The forbidden politics of desire had shaped the destiny of kings, and even in ruin, its legacy refused to die. The empire's heart began to rot long before anyone dared to say it aloud. The marble walls of the palaces still gleamed, but their foundations trembled under the weight of deceit and indulgence. The same silken corridors that once hummed with poetry now carried the echoes of arguments, betrayals, and whispers of rebellion. The scent of rose and sandalwood could no longer mask the stench of decay. As Aurangzeb's puritanical rule spread across the empire, it suffocated everything that had once made it glorious. Art, music, and love, once the empire's lifeblood, were branded as sins. The courtesans, who had once been jewels of the court, were now hunted like shadows, their homes raided, their jewelry seized, their songs outlawed. Yet, beneath the surface, the very same men who preached morality continued to seek them in secret. It was a time of hypocrisy so thick one could taste it in the air. One by one, the women who had ruled the nights vanished. Some fled to smaller kingdoms, Hyderabad, Lucknow, Bhopal, where the old traditions still flickered like dying embers. Others were forced into obscurity, their beauty fading in silence behind closed doors. A few refused to yield. They turned their brothels into sanctuaries for the lost. Poets, musicians, and rebels who defied the empire's suffocating piety. In these hidden rooms, resistance was born, not with swords, but with songs that mourned what was lost. It was during this collapse that stories began to surface of the last great courtesan of Delhi, known only as Mehrunissa, the woman of light. She was said to have once been favored by a prince, a man so besotted that he nearly abandoned his duties for her. When the emperor discovered this, Mehrunissa was accused of witchcraft, of corrupting noblemen with her beauty. She was sentenced to exile. But before she left, she did something no one had dared before. She stood before the emperor and said, "You fear me not because I am sinful, but because I remind you of what you have lost." Her words became legend. She vanished into the countryside, her fate uncertain. Some say she died penniless, buried beneath an unmarked grave. Others whisper that she fled north and founded a house where the daughters of fallen nobles were taught poetry, music, and survival. Whatever her end, Mehrunissa became a ghost that haunted the Mughal legacy, a symbol of its contradictions. By the early 18th century, the empire was fracturing. The Marathas rose in the south, the Persians invaded from the west, and Delhi itself became a battlefield. The once mighty palaces turned into tombs of faded grandeur. The eunuchs who had once guarded the harems now scavenged for food. The courtesans, their power long broken, were scattered like ashes in the wind. Yet, even as the empire bled, the memory of those hidden brothels endured. Foreign travelers wrote of abandoned chambers still heavy with the scent of musk, of murals, depicting women with eyes like burning coal, remnants of an age that had worshipped beauty, then destroyed it. When Nadir Shah's forces stormed Delhi in 1739, the city burned for days. The invaders looted not only gold and jewels, but stories. They found the secret corridors that once connected the harem to the brothel and marveled at the intricate deception of it all. To them, it was proof of a civilization too decadent to survive. But they missed the truth. The decadence wasn't the cause of the empire's fall. It was the mask that hid its fear. For the Mughal court had lost what made it human. In its hunger for purity, it killed its own heart. The laughter of women, once the pulse of the empire, had been silenced. The music that had shaped its identity was banned. Without its sensual soul, the Mughal Empire became nothing more than a machine of conquest, cold, mechanical, and doomed. The courtesans had not merely entertained kings, they had reminded them of their mortality. When they vanished, the emperors became hollow. Even in its final days, there were those who clung to the old ways. In Lucknow, Nawabs tried to revive the culture of refinement, building new houses of poetry and dance, but they were pale shadows of what had been. The women there were no longer confidants of emperors. They were commodities for merchants and soldiers. The language of seduction became one of survival. The elegance turned into performance, the mystery into necessity. One evening, a British officer visiting India during the early colonial period recorded his impressions of a once royal woman living in poverty near Delhi. Her eyes, he wrote, held a sorrow deeper than grief, a remembrance of a time when she commanded kings. He described her small home, its walls covered with cracked mirrors and faded portraits of Mughal nobles. She sang, he noted, not to please, but to mourn. That voice, fragile and trembling, was the echo of a vanished world. The irony was cruel. The empire that had silenced its courtesans had taught the world to romanticize them. Later generations would call them tawaifs, artists, seductresses, philosophers in silk. Yet their truth was far darker. They were survivors of a system that used them, exalted them, and then erased them. Behind every song was a story of loss. Behind every jewel, a tear never shed in public. As colonial power grew, the British, with their Victorian morals, condemned what remained of the courtesan culture as immoral, corrupt, and backward. They shut down performance houses, taxed dancers as prostitutes, and wrote laws that erased centuries of artistic heritage. The final curtain fell not with the Mughal collapse, but with empire's rebirth under a different name. What had once been secret and sacred became shameful and forgotten. Yet history has a cruel way of remembering what men try to bury. Even now, if you walk through the ruins of old Delhi, through narrow lanes once filled with perfume and poetry, you can almost hear the faint echo of gungroos, the anklets of dancers long gone. Their music lingers in the stones, in the wind that brushes past the crumbling arches. The empire may have fallen, but its ghosts remain, whispering to those who listen closely. We were the soul of this world, and you silenced us. And in that whisper lies the true consequence. Not just the fall of an empire, but the loss of something deeper, something irreplaceable, the fragile beauty that once held power accountable. The Mughal emperors built tombs for their loves, but they could not build one for their sins. The secret brothels behind the palace walls may have been hidden, but their legacy, their warning, was carved into the heart of history itself. Centuries have passed since those nights when silk whispered against marble and music filled the corridors of empires. The palaces are silent now, ruins claimed by dust and time. But if you stand there at dusk, where moonlight pools across the stone, you might still feel their presence. The scent of rosewater lingers faintly. The echo of laughter flickers through the air, like a memory refusing to die. It's as if the walls themselves remember what men tried to forget. History, after all, has a cruel rhythm. It repeats the same dance under different names. The Mughal brothels may have vanished, but the pattern endures. Power still hides its sins behind veils of respectability. Women are still used, praised, and erased when inconvenient. The same hypocrisy that destroyed. An empire lives quietly in the modern world, in boardrooms, in politics, in every place where desire and power meet in secret. The empire fell, but the hunger that built it never did. Imagine one of those women, reborn today, educated, outspoken, unafraid. Would the world treat her any differently? Or would it still whisper, still judge, still reduce her story to scandal, instead of strength? The courtesans of the Mughal era were never just ornaments. They were archivists of emotion, artists of survival, masters of persuasion in a world ruled by men. Their legacy is not shame, it is endurance. The next time you see the Taj Mahal glistening under the moon, remember, it was built not just for love, but for redemption. Behind its perfection lies an empire that once drowned in its own contradictions. And somewhere in that marble silence, the voices of forgotten women still echo, reminding us that beauty without conscience, desire without compassion, always leads to ruin. So if stories like this speak to you, if you believe that history's darkest corners deserve to be seen, not hidden, then stay with us. There are more truths buried in time, waiting to be uncovered. Because the past doesn't die. It waits, and sometimes it sings softly from behind palace walls.